Hi, everybody. Thanks so much for coming to this webinar on Percy Visual Engine. We have a lot of great announcements and really interesting things that we've done to improve the diffing infrastructure in Percy and all the features that you'll get to take advantage of. So let's dive right in and get started. I'm Mike Fodinakis. I am Percy founder and now principal software engineer at BrowserStack. So I sort of started this whole mess of Percy and really dove into visual testing. And as you all are probably aware, Percy was acquired by BrowserStack in 2020. And so we've been able to rapidly expand Percy's features and capabilities post the acquisition. So I'm excited to go through today some of the things we've been able to do specifically on what we're calling Percy Visual Engine. So we'll go through a little bit of a visual testing intro. I'll go through that a little bit fast because hopefully many of you are familiar with visual testing so far. We'll talk a little bit about our first generation differ and then all the improvements we've been able to make, some UX enhancements that are possible now that we have this new Percy Visual Engine, and then talk about what's coming next in the future. So quick lightning round on what is Percy. Percy is a visual testing and review platform. So what does that mean? Well, we think of visual testing kind of like this. There's lots of different realms of testing, right? Like you can do a lot of manual testing, boot up devices, just test something on your phone, test something on your browser. You can use BrowserStack Live to test things on hundreds of devices and different operating systems and real devices in the real cloud. You can then sort of move to automate that with functional testing, right? So we probably have a lot of people here who have continuous integration services and lots of automated tests that just tell them, pass or fail, like you broke the behavior of this thing or you didn't. And that helps us a lot with getting faster with our releases. But a big missing piece of testing and test culture and the landscape was visual testing, right? Like kind of the last link in the chain is, does it look right? And it may still function correctly, but it might be totally visually broken. So visual testing provides this sort of human and automation centric view of how to test visual changes and then how to review them before they go out to production. Here's an example of a few visual bugs. So this just text overlapping a button incorrectly on a mobile site. Layout issue where the text wrapping just went outside of the bounds, and then some illegible text on this page. Lots of different examples of visual bugs I'm sure you've seen all over. So we kind of segment this in terms of like functional testing is, does it behave correctly? And visual testing is, does it look correct, right? And it's supposed to sort of accompany the other forms of testing in your application and the ways that you test. The reason that this is such a big problem is that there's an open-ended number of combinations of these things to test, and it's only getting worse and worse as we get more device segmentation and more fragmentation in the ecosystem, right? So you've got a number of devices times by a number of browsers times by a number of different screen resolutions you need to test on. Your application might have multiple different screens, might have multiple different states of those screens. So this becomes kind of a problem where you're basically not going to be able to manually test all of these combinations all of the time and have confidence. And then without any automation, you're also relying on human memory to remember, does this page look like it did before? Does it act like it did before? Rather than sort of having automation to help you move toward knowing exactly what's changed. So this is what Percy does, is provide a visual testing and visual review infrastructure to be able to do that. One of the core concepts that we use in order to show you the differences between two images is this thing called visual diffs. So you can see here two images, and a visual diff is a highlight of what has changed between these two images. So as a human, I might be able to look at these and say, oh yeah, the logo changed in the top, that's pretty easy. But I might not spot this very subtle sort of color change in this icon down here under the password field. But with a visual diff, you can very easily see the highlight of what's changed on this page. So you kind of end up having to learn how to read these visual diffs. A lot of what we've done in Percy over time is sort of manage how these visual diffs are generated. So I'm going to go through quite a few examples of how that has improved over time. But first, let me tell you how these actually get generated in the first place. So you've got your app and you've got your test suite here that's running. And you've integrated like the Percy SDK and CLI into that, that testing suite. So we provide basically across many different languages and frameworks this consistent Percy snapshot interface, which you're basically saying like, okay, here's my homepage, take a snapshot. Here's my homepage. When I click the dropdown, take a snapshot. You can sort of manipulate this into taking different test states and sending them up to us. Most people think that you're actually sending up an image to Percy, and Percy's going to do image comparison there. But actually, a huge part of Percy's architecture is the fact that we actually send up DOM snapshots and assets like HTML, CSS, images, the different pieces that make up the architecture of your page. And we actually render them at various browser and width combinations for you on real devices and real browsers. And we do this massively and parallelly at scale. So you can very quickly get a lot of visual coverage across all these different combinations that we were talking about. And it's quite fast because, you know, HTML, CSS are pretty small, but they make up a lot of what the page is in order to actually fully, you know, render it and make the pixels. So that goes through our visual rendering infrastructure, which is when we first started Chrome and Firefox, and is now 6 different browsers and devices. And then each screenshot is then compared in our visual diffing infrastructure. So we're going to spend a lot of time talking about this particular piece today. And then after that, your changes go through a visual review process. We're not going to really cover this at all today. This is a big part of how Percy works, is your ability to actually review the changes, say this is approve this one, you know, request changes on this other one, et cetera, sort of move it through the flow. But you can check out our other webinars for some examples of that, or check out the product if you haven't used it yet. So we're going to spend most of our time today in this realm on the visual diffing infrastructure. So let's talk first about our first generation differ and what we did. This was created back in 2015, back when Uptown Funk was #1, and Birdman had been released and won Best Picture, and when Apple had released the iPhone 6. So, you know, it's only 7 years old, but that's pretty old for software in a lot of ways. And it was originally written in Ruby with sort of a wrapper around ImageMagick. If you haven't used ImageMagick, it's a pretty extensive and relatively old set of image processing utilities and binaries and libraries that you can use to process images. And it worked pretty well for us for a long time. We were able to get done what we needed to do image comparisons. But we kind of realized that we needed more power and more customizability over time. And we knew that we could do better in terms of speed. There were better languages and setups for image processing and data science, better, wider communities, not better communities, wider communities, creating a lot of open source add-ons, lots of similar sort of similar purpose things, and easier manipulation of the images and things. So we decided we just needed a more powerful set of tools and infrastructure. And after a lot of analysis, we came up with using Python and OpenCV. We decided to rewrite the entire diffing infrastructure in Python and OpenCV. We gained a lot of, you know, speed in this setup, and a lot of community libraries, open source discussions, and processing, image processing utilities, et cetera. And it was ended up being quite fast. So this new version was very extendable and allowed us to add a lot of the things I'm about to tell you about in just a second. But first, let me tell you about the speed. We rewrote the diffing infrastructure 1-to-1 with exactly what our old first generation differ did. We rewrote it in Python and OpenCV. So if you had used Percy, you wouldn't even know that this change happened underneath. I kind of, you know, it's one of those change the airplane while it's flying kind of things. And we made it sort of 1-for-1 compatible, but the entire infrastructure underneath the differ actually changed. So then while we were using this, we decided to benchmark it and see how our new differ was performing. And the one feature that you would have seen was all the diffing got way faster. So our P50 was 68% faster, 35 on P99, and 90% faster on the worst case scenarios. So that's a great start just for the 1-to-1 sort of rewrite. And then we have a new baseline for adding a lot of improvements to the algorithm. So what kind of improvements have we been able to make? Well, always, as we're doing visual diffing, our goals are to reduce noise and to increase the highlighting of important changes. So first we have to figure out like what to do with noise. And what do I mean by noise? Well, noise can kind of come in a few different types. Layout shifts, things moving around on the page. These are often from browsers just doing things in very subtle ways that as a human you would look at and you wouldn't even notice, but browsers are not rendering them exactly the same every time, and non-deterministic rendering. So layout shifts might be caused by you adding something to the page that's actually like a feature or change, and then non-deterministic rendering is a lot of the browsers saying just sort of rendering things slightly differently, which I'll go over some examples of. One of the different types of layout shifts is vertical content shifts. So here's an example from the Ember Guide docs pages. They've changed the first line of this and split this code block and added some things. So, but the rest of the page is basically just shifted down, but it looks the same. But this section up here has changed. So this causes a vertical content shift from the top section. In our first generation diffing infrastructure, we would have produced a diff that was pretty noisy in this situation. So you'll see here this very long visual diff that doesn't really highlight the most important parts of the pages. You still know that there's something that's changed on this page. You can go visually review it with your eyes, but we're not really giving you the right hints to say, here's exactly where you should be looking for the changes. So we've been able to massively improve this in the Percy Visual Engine. And we were able to actually completely reduce the noise that's created in the intersections there and only show you the most important pieces. So you can see here with our next level techniques that you're highlighting just the top section that's changed in Percy Visual Engine. And then nothing except for the small changes that have happened in between. And then you can see that there's a height difference in this page as well. So we're showing you the height difference diffs as well. So much better, right? Much cleaner, much more easy to review in Percy's web interface. Another example of a vertical content shift. This is actually us testing Percy in Percy. So this is a little meta, but the screenshot that you see here is actually a Percy page inside of the Percy web application. So you can see here in the first generation differ that there's a bit of noise because we added a header bar to the top of the page that shifted everything down, another vertical content shift. In the previous version of the differ, you see all the content diffs below. But in the new one with our page shift detection algorithms, we're able to completely eliminate the noise of the change from below from the layout shift and only show this tiny red bar, which you can't really see here, but is shown in the Percy web interface. That is the only visual change really relevant on the page. So that's a pretty massive improvement for being able to surface important changes. So now let's talk about, we talked about layout shifts. Let's talk about non-deterministic rendering. When Percy first started, we only had Firefox, then we added Chrome. And then with the addition of being part of BrowserStack, we've added Safari, Edge, mobile Safari, and mobile Chrome on Android, running on real devices and real device infrastructure around the world. So we were able to, for many years, be very, very controlled with Chrome and Firefox in particular. We had a very tightly controlled rendering environment, like I showed you earlier, where you're passing up the DOM snapshots. And we were able to do a lot of work to make sure that the pixels that were generated from these browsers were as stable as possible. So we basically sidestepped a lot of the issues around visual noise and things that might be created. But as soon as you introduce things like Safari running on a real Mac or Safari running on a real iPhone, these kinds of things, take Safari on a real Mac, for example, you've got a real GPU running that is doing hardware accelerated rendering for this particular browser that's showing you pixels. And in particular, GPUs are not meant to render things exactly the same every time. They're optimized for speed versus accuracy. So we started seeing a lot more visual differences that were a lot harder to control in the environments that we have. And this was a big push for us to update our diffing infrastructure to be able to handle these. You'd also have things like CPU chipset differences, getting M1 Max versus Intel Max, et cetera. A lot of these things can cause non-deterministic renders. And as we learned over the time, there's hundreds of different situations where browsers might make a trade-off for speed of rendering for the user versus accuracy of rendering it exactly the same as it might have last time. And so we needed to be able to handle these situations better. One of these is just this kind of situation. So you've got these two images. If you squint, they're pretty much the same, but if you look at them a little closely, you see that they're actually like very subtly different. If you compress this down to its original size, it probably wouldn't look different to your eyes at all. But if you are looking at it from a computer perspective, it's actually quite different. This is just anti-aliasing, right? This is just anti-aliasing differences for when this text was rendered. And here's another example. You probably can't even tell the difference between these two images. But if you look and you flip back and forth between them, you'll see a very subtle sort of sizing difference or anti-aliasing difference in the logo on the left. So these are not due to like a code change or something that the visual reviewer would know anything about. They're just due to how browsers decide to render and actually print these things out to the screen. So we looked into this a bit, and we figured that we'd be able to solve the anti-aliasing side of this. So we found a paper published in 2009, actually, that outlines an algorithm for detecting anti-aliased pictures. And we were able to implement our own version of this in our diffing infrastructure to detect and remove anti-aliased pixels. So in our first generation differ, you might see something like this in these situations, but in Percy Visual Engine, they'll be completely clear. And as you'd expect as a human reviewer, those little subtle changes you would never notice are also not noticed or they're noticed and removed by Percy Visual Engine. So we're able to provide a very clean and clear visual review experience. The final type of non-deterministic rendering I want to talk about is text shift compensation. So because of the reasons I listed earlier around browsers, text position and kerning and text leading and things might actually change between renders as well. Here's an example where you can see the difference between, you can't really tell the difference between these, but you might be able to see in this overlay them shifting back and forth. And this is not due to a code change, right? This is just the browser inconsistent rendering, and it's not something we want to show to users. So to compensate for this, we implemented an OCR library and a bit of machine learning to determine whether this text shifting is something that a user would actually care about. And then if we determine that it's not important, we actually remove the diff. So then you would see this kind of clean and clear diff here. And this just is less to review, right? It's less to review in the visual review experience, and it's just much more targeted, only highlighting the visual changes that are important. So this is another sort of improvement we're extremely excited about talking about publicly, and that has been in Percy and you'd be taking advantage of today. So that's a few of the improvements we've been able to make on the diffing infrastructure. Let's talk about the foundation that we built in the Percy Visual Engine and improvements we've been able to bring to the UX of Percy as well. So one of the things we wanted to make better was highlighting hard to find diffs. So for example, let's say you change this icon and it added little tick marks around the thumb, and then you push your pages up to Percy and want to review a diff. Well, this icon might be buried somewhere deep in a page, some long page down here. And in the first generation differ, you would have to kind of hunt for these small pixel changes. But with our new Percy Visual Engine infrastructure, we can allow a much more fine-grained analysis of the diff images and know the regions of change. So we've added a highlighter bar along the left-hand side to actually highlight where you should be looking. So you can see here the diff highlighter is on, and it's highlighting the tick mark changes, and then you can turn the visual diff on and off, but the diff highlighter is still telling you like, this is where the regions of change are on this page. Our team really loves this feature a lot, and we hope that this is something that you'll enjoy as well. So with the visual engine becoming much more easily extendable, we were able to adapt it to things like not just a whole page, but also single elements as well. This was a very highly requested feature in Percy. So you can now today in Percy actually capture single elements and only do diffing on the part that you care about for any particular page. So for example, let's take this page inside of Percy itself. Let's say that we want to set up a bunch of tests for just the footer of the pages and we want to ignore everything else. Well, this is actually quite easy now across all of our SDKs. You can just pass a scope argument and pass a CSS selector of the element that you want. And as part of the rendering pipeline where we use where Percy Visual Engine takes hold, we will actually just capture that single element that you've specified and only show it in the review experience. So this is quite a nice way of being able to hone down on exactly what you want to visually review. And one last feature that I want to talk about is actually unreleased but coming soon. So this is quite exciting. Random data and random regions are always going to exist on pages where you're not going to be able to control the times or the dates or like, you know, the rotating images. There's just going to be sections of the page where you know it's going to change and you don't want to be alerted about or highlighted about the visual differences in those. So here's an example from one of our internal tests of just like dates that get randomly generated on this page. We have had, and you can currently use a thing called Percy specific CSS to manage these. You provide a small block of CSS that only applies in Percy's rendering environment, and you can knock out these parts of the pages. But we've heard from customers many times that they would like the ability to just drag a box on a page and say, ignore this region. So very soon, you will be able to actually do that in Percy. You'll be able to highlight a region on the Percy web UI and just say, ignore these sections and no longer worry about these sort of flaky data situations you might have or certain areas that you want to ignore. This is a very, very highly requested feature that we're excited to be able to announce and get out to you quite soon. So in summary, we've talked about our first generation differ, kind of how it was developed and what technologies we use and how we were able to rewrite it in place and add a bunch of foundation for new changes. We talked about a lot of the new changes that we were able to make to our visual diffing infrastructure and a lot of the UX improvements we were able to make on top of that. Yeah, I thought that was exciting to sort of see some of the features that we've been able to launch in Percy Visual Engine. By the way, you can take advantage of all of these features today in Percy across all plans. So if you're using Percy today, you have all of these advancements. In the future, what are we going to do? So let's talk a little bit about that, and then we can get to some questions. Well, we're going to move everything to the blockchain. We actually think that Percy really should just move to the blockchain, and Web3, we're just going to move everything to Web3. Hopefully there's some people laughing out there. No, we're not gonna do anything. There's no blockchain, no blockchain coming. We're always looking for ways to improve the differ. So improvements are coming to further reduce noise reduction techniques, to further advance the noise reduction techniques and show you only diffs that you care about. We're working on this intelligent layout parsing to be more flexible in how we display diffs. And of course, we're always thinking about, you know, speed and performance optimizations is a big part of Percy and how we think that visual testing has to be continuous and fast. And we're always looking for new ideas too. So if you have any other ideas, we'd love to hear from you. You can drop them in the chat right now. You can always hit us up on Twitter @Percy_IO. Thank you very much. I am @MikePotinakis on Twitter, and you can always visit Percy.io for more information. Hopefully this webinar was useful for you to see what changes we've made and announce Percy Visual Engine. I'm going to take a few questions now and look through the Q&A. If you haven't used the Q&A feature, you can feel free to drop questions into the Q&A box in Zoom, and we'll go through a few here. Zachary asks, is Shadow DOM element support coming? Nothing to announce today, but yes, we are working on that and should have some more info for you soon. Definitely, we've been hearing this. It's an example of something that comes up in a lot of different situations with certain frameworks, so we're definitely working on that. Michael, will it be possible to set larger screen sizes more than 2000 by 2000 px? Think 4K monitors. Yeah, we've heard this a few times recently, actually. I think that there are some technical restrictions there on the render resolutions that we have in the devices and things that we have running. But we have started thinking about this. So keep asking this. I think we've seen this come up from a few different customers just in the last few months. It makes sense as 4K monitors and other things are getting bigger. So I don't have a direct answer for you today, but we're definitely hearing about this and starting to think about this question. Is execution for mobile devices, or does it require a license? Any cost involved? Yeah, you can check out the Percy browserstack.com/Percy and go to the pricing page. And then you can see exactly like the mobile plan set up there. These do run on real devices in a real device cloud. There are pieces of this that you can access on the free plan, which is forever free, and you can get quite a few visual diffs set up for small projects on the free plan. So feel free to check it out. Yes, so is it possible to define a place for ignoring a comparison for dynamic content? Yeah, so hopefully you caught the ignore region setup. You can also use, if you check out our documentation for Percy specific CSS, there's kind of two different ways of doing this. Will the differ apply only to old historic runs or to new ones? That's a great question. It only applies to new ones, but a few of these features have been released over the last few months as we've updated the differ over time. So probably you've already seen some of the effects of these things go out, but it'll affect things from there forward. We did a nice sort of like versioning setup internally where you wouldn't have really noticed when things would have happened, and then it would have just gotten better for you. Do the improved diffing out features also work with uploaded screenshots and not just images generated on Percy? Great question. So yeah, we have a feature called Percy Upload that allows you to upload screenshots that you've generated and pushed up. Some of these features will apply to them and some will not. A lot of them will, because they are sort of generic for the image type that's up there. They're not required to be part of the main page that's there. But I would say probably 90% of everything we showed you today will actually apply to generated images that you generated yourself as well. So yeah, should be pretty powerful there in terms of working with images that you're generating. Yes, all of those features are currently included in the visual mobile testing. So there's no difference there. They are across web browsers on desktops and web browsers on mobile devices as well. Is it possible to disable the auto approve feature when Percy snapshots are captured for the master pipeline? Yes, you can change that in the settings of your project page. There is you can set which branches the auto approve feature applies to. Is it possible to snapshot different states like hovers, focus, active? Same thing with catching actions like open, close, and modal. Yes, so you have to, this is kind of framework and language dependent. You have to see in the docs, like it totally depends on which framework you're using, but often for like, different Selenium types or Cypress types or whatever, you can trigger the hovers and focus and actives, and we will capture the DOM state that exists there. Because we're capturing a DOM and not some of the things that are like attributes on the DOM that aren't present in the DOM serialization itself, some things like focuses, I think, do get lost in that, and we're not able to capture those. But I believe we have some techniques in the docs to capture certain states like that, especially if you're doing like component testing where you just say, here's the hover state, here's the focus state, here's the active state. You can capture components like that and send them up to Percy and we'll render them. So it's kind of framework dependent, but most of the time the answer is yes. Any plans for visual testing outside the browser, e.g. PDF files? Oh, that's very interesting. Yeah, we've heard this a handful of times. Most of the times when we get asked this question, the customer has the ability to actually, they're like doing an HTML render of a page and then they're printing it to PDF or something. So we often ask them to just test the HTML version, and that's the part that you can actually test with Percy. But for PDF files itself, we don't have any plans right now to be adding direct support for that, but we'll definitely keep that in mind. We do hear this over time, a handful of times. Sorry, this is a bit of a long one. So we're using Percy exec to wrap a JS-based Selenium WebDriver test. We built our own SDK on top of Percy CLI. Is there a way to cancel a build if our underlying test actually failed? What happens today that we end up with a broken build on the Percy dashboard? And that's a bit annoying. Yeah, I understand what you're saying here. So I guess my number one answer would be, it doesn't matter if there's a broken build on the Percy dashboard because it won't be used for, it shouldn't be used for any baselines, those kinds of things. Percy doesn't have, the SDK doesn't know if your CI suite has failed, unfortunately. So we do have actually a feature request that that we do have marked is for being able to like mark a build as failed from the CLI side, basically provide an API to say, oh, the CI failed, so actually fail this build on the Percy side as well. So I don't believe that that is something that you could do right now, but let's look into that a little bit further and see if we have a better answer for you there. If not, I think that that is actually something that we have planned. I don't know if there's a timeline for it or any sort of announcement on that now, but we have heard this before. Yeah, I think we've got through quite a few here. Let me see if I can read some out of the chat and. Yeah, what are the languages supported for implementing Percy? If you go to docs.percy.io, you'll see a big list of the languages and frameworks supported. We have quite extensive framework and language support now that basically covers a lot of the common use cases. So check that out and see if your language and framework is supported. And the final question is it integrated with any CI/CD pipeline? Yep, same answer, actually. We have quite a few CI/CD pipelines that are supported in Percy, and you can very easily sort of add support for anything that's sort of custom there. But yeah, we do run and work well with all the major CI providers. Great. You can get started for free today on Percy.io, and we are also hiring. If you are interested in working on problems like this, you can check out BrowserStack.com/careers. So feel free to fill out the poll that may have just popped up on your screen. And yeah, thank you all for coming. Really appreciate your time, and have a great day.